Hello, I'm coming at you from down here. So I'm trying to use a new program, which is Zoom, which lets you use your PowerPoint slides as a virtual background. So let's give it a try. We are on chapter 5. We're going to be looking at families and communities, covering topics like understanding how people view public schools, looking at diversities of families, respecting the cultures and how that can impact your schools, as well as some of the choices that parents have. Let's start with how the public views education. I thought it would be helpful to start with this question. Who is it that has the most positive opinion of public schools? Who do you think? Well, you might be thinking perhaps that is parents or people with the education. We're going to see that there are actually a variety of types of people who have positive views of public education, starting with, and I think this one probably makes a lot of sense, parents. If you're a parent and you're sending your son or daughter to public school, you probably feel somewhat positively about it. If not, you'd have a great deal of cognitive dissonance, feeling like you're sending your students somewhere that you don't like. So parents tend to have positive views. Who else? Adults who typically earn a higher income or higher SES, that stands for socioeconomic status, as well as adults who have a college degree. In surveys, they do tend to have higher opinions of public ed. And finally, Caucasian adults. So this is the group that when you're surveying people about how do you feel about public education, they tend to give the most positive responses. Next, we need to take a look at teacher quality. So how do they feel about the quality of teachers? So the majority of parents do rate their teachers as being good or excellent, which is fabulous to hear. But there is a disparity. Teachers from higher income schools do tend to fare better on these surveys than those from lower income schools. And we've discussed this in previous chapters, how there's a disparity in funding, there's a disparity in resources, as well as the qualifications of the teachers that they attract. Also, there's a difference based upon the grade that you teach. Elementary and middle school teachers are seen as being more compassionate and caring and engaging, interacting with their students. High school teachers don't score quite as well on that. They're seen as being a little less communicative, a little less helpful. Personally, I think that is due to the nature of the age of the child. High schoolers, you wouldn't expect the teachers to need to be as communicative with the parents because those students are old enough to remember what their homework is and when their homework is due. So there typically is a drop off in communication with high school, and that is a result of the age of the students. All right, moving along. Let's take a look at the families of our students, because again, if you have that whole child approach, you're not just teaching math to the student, you're also looking at the whole child, which includes his or her family. All right, family structures. So I think this is probably no surprise to you. In the United States, our families are incredibly diverse. I try to think of some TV shows up here that illustrate the diversity of our families today. So here's a question for you. What percent of children in the United States live with both parents who are married? What do you think? I mean, we know the divorce rate is typically always on the increase. So right now, what percent do live with both married parents? If you said 64%, you were right. So I'm glad to see that it is higher than 50-50. So it is, not necessarily a bad statistic. So again, nearly 64% of your kids will be living at home with two married parents. Children, however, they are at an advantage when they do come from a home with two loving parents. Now, that doesn't mean that two quarreling or stressful parents are going to be helpful. It's only if it's two loving parents. But that is not essential for academic success. It's a help, but you can certainly still succeed in your schools, even if that is something that is not in your household. I thought this chart would be helpful for looking at the breakdown of families today. And here you get even more detail. For instance, whether it is single mother, single father, and so on. So nearly 25% of children in the United States will be living with just their mom, so a single mom family. That is a significant percent, 25%. And of those, if you break it down based upon ethnicity, nearly 50% of your African American children will be living with a single mother. So there is also a difference or a disparity there depending upon ethnic identity. So let's look at the role of poverty here. We know that poverty, we know that marital conflict or stress, as well as family instability. And by family instability, what I mean is if they are moving from place to place, if there are changes in the family structure, whether they're going through a divorce or a separation or a remarriage, all of those things tend to correlate with problem behavior in the classroom. So the students who are acting up, the students who are getting in difficulty, tend to be the ones who are coming from poverty, who are having conflict in the home, whether or not their parents are married, and who have that instability. And you can see that here in this chart. The chart clearly shows that students who come from higher poverty schools were more likely to physically attack their teacher, to have physical fighting in their school, or to be disrespectful. So poverty is a much higher indicator than marital status. I also wanted to show you this data, and all this comes from the Fordham Institute. When you compare low and high poverty schools, the relationship between student behavior, the student behavior is obviously more of a problem at lower income schools. So how does poverty affect kids? I found this graphic online and I thought it was very helpful. It shows the multifaceted effect of poverty. They're worried about their parents. They don't have as many opportunities when it comes to education, which also affects how they feel. It affects their hopes and their aspirations. They feel more insecure. They feel excluded. There are a lot of social emotional outcomes that go along with poverty that affect them in their schools. Poverty is most common among single mother households. Look at this chart up here. Whether you're looking at married couples, single father, single mother, overwhelmingly, you're going to see more poverty in those households. Whereas only 10% of married households are in poverty. How many do you think single parents, what percent of single mother households live in poverty? Remember, it's 10% for married. How much for single moms? If you said 43%, you're correct. So more than double, well, actually more than quadruple the married households. So although having two married parents at home is not essential for doing well in school, single mother households are at more of a disadvantage because of the poverty issue. So if you have poverty, marital stress, family stress, transitions, all of that can relate to instability in schools, difficulty with behavior and academics. So something else that comes about from poverty is it can also affect the type of health care that they're getting, the nutrition that they're having, whether or not they have enough food to concentrate, to be healthy, inadequate living conditions. They may or may not have internet at home. They may or may not have electricity at home. We also know there are over 20,000 homeless students in the state of Ohio. They may or may not have a specific home to go to. But food insecurity is certainly an issue for your students living in poverty. Food insecurity is whether or not they have access to affordable, nutritious food. If you're curious about food insecurity, here's some data on it. You can see over 48 million Americans are considered to be food insecure. These are going to be the issues that come up when you have a snow day and you're worried about whether or not your students have food that day. When COVID occurred and schools sent families home, they were still feeding them for quite some time because they knew that there were families who could not afford to feed their kids. And food insecurity does affect how they're doing in schools. You can see here how it affects their ability to concentrate on their work, to have access to wireless and so on. Now let's take a look at another aspect of family structure, which is LGBTQ families. As a teacher, you need to be prepared to work with these students and their families. You're going to need to help your students to understand that families are different so that they can better relate to and accept all of the students in their classroom, regardless of their family makeup. So whether you want to focus on books that you can read, activities that you can do to show that your students that they're all different kinds of families. As a teacher, you're going to need to be welcoming to all of your parents. At parent-teacher night, when you see them at pickup and drop off, be welcoming and accepting of all your parents. So that's going to take you a long way when it comes to working with parents. Now we're going to move forward and look at the role of culture in education. So we have looked at culture a few different ways in this classroom. Now we're going to be seeing how culture can impact your specific classroom. Let's look at culture by itself first. Culture is something that is learned from the people in our family. It's learned from your parents, your grandparents, those who take care of you. We call this process enculturation. This is what you go through while you're acquiring and learning the traditions and the beliefs and expectations of your culture. And then it becomes reinforced by the events and holidays and so on within your family, where you see people celebrating and passing down that culture. So we share this culture with others. It is adapted to our circumstance. You'll find that, for instance, as individuals move to different countries, they might slightly adapt their culture to fit where they're living at that time. And culture is part of what defines us. So some interesting things about culture. You might be wondering, why in the world am I showing Shaws of Sunset? Okay, so the reason is, studies have found we are most comfortable with people who share our own culture. So for instance, I don't know why it made me think of Shaws of Sunset, but you'll notice that pretty much everyone in that show comes from the same country, has a very similar ethnic identity. Because of this, they understand one another, they like the same foods, they, in some ways you might say, speak the same language. That is the same for everyone from every culture. We tend to understand people from our own culture better. We understand their words and actions. All right, so let me give you an example. A few years ago, OU went on a trip to Columbus to visit with the Somali community. We visited a mosque, we went to the marketplace, we met with business leaders, all sorts of things, and I was part of this trip. I think you can see me right up there, back when I had dark hair. So it was a very interesting trip. At one point, there were a group of individuals talking, and they were all men from the Somali community, and they were talking with some of the professors from OU. And I walked over and offered my hand because everyone was shaking hands and introducing one another. And the men immediately put up their hand and said, "We cannot shake your hand." And I have to admit, I was fairly offended by this. I didn't understand they were shaking hands with my male professors. But me, I felt as if I was shunned from the group, and I didn't know how to respond, and I just kind of walked away. Well, again, we understand people from our own culture best. What happens is we sometimes misunderstand the cultural cues from people of a different group. I didn't understand that to them, as married men, from their culture, they cannot shake hands with another female. They did not intend disrespect. But these misunderstandings can be seen as a personal affront, so I took it as disrespect. And perhaps they also took it as disrespect because I was offering my hand for them to shake. So this is why we do tend to be comfortable with people in our own culture, because we understand them, and there are less confusions like you might see in this picture up here. So this connects to something we call cultural relativism, which is the idea of trying to view a culture from their point of view, not your own. So rather than me taking it as an offense that I'm not good enough for them to shake my hand, to see it from their point of view that as a married man from their culture, they're not to shake hands with another woman. So that helps me understand how I should interact with them. So cultural relativism, not judging other groups by our standards, but trying to see things from their point of view. This can help us to respect and understand people from other cultures. So when it comes to the role of culture, here's some advice for teachers. When you do put yourself out there to learn about other cultures, to interact with people from other cultures, you will gain respect from individuals in your community. I thought here was an interesting article about how during COVID, how teachers were recognizing that some individuals from certain communities didn't have access to Wi-Fi, and how they started working with businesses and with their schools to figure out how to help those students. You will also find that the more you get out there and interact with different cultures and different communities, You're going to better understand your parents and your students. You'll know why they behave the way they do, why they might think differently about customs or homeworks or the school environment. And you'll also be viewed as someone who respects other cultures. So it is good to put yourself out there and to learn. So while we're also talking about the role of cultures, there's another interesting concept, and that is called cultural borders. So what tends to happen is schools tend to reflect the culture of the dominant society in which they are in. So if you were in rural America and you have a school there, your school is going to reflect the culture of rural America. And students from that dominant culture feel complete congruence. They feel at home, they feel secure there, it fits with what they know. So for instance, think about some of our rural schools. In our rural schools, they tend to close for deer season to allow their students to go hunting. They might also have days like drive your tractor to school day. That makes sense and is in congruence with people from that community. An outsider coming in might see that as quite odd. That may not fit with them. Perhaps they're Buddhist and they don't believe in hunting animals. Perhaps they're from an urban area and they don't own a tractor. So students from the minority culture can feel what we call cultural mismatch, meaning what they are seeing at their school does not match their own culture, does not fit with where they feel comfortable. And as such, they might feel almost forced to adopt the dominant culture in order to fit in. And that is actually quite common. So if cultural differences result in one group being treated differently from another, we call that a cultural border. So for instance, you might see signs like the one up top saying you must speak English in this school. Okay, you're here in America, you're going to speak English. There are some schools that have banned headwear from certain cultures. So what these schools are doing is they're setting up a cultural border, treating groups differently, which can obviously cause some misunderstandings and hurt feelings. So let's continue and look at how students' cultures are reflected in schools. So you're going to want to be prepared for a lot of different parental opinions when it comes to education. You're going to be even, regardless of where you're at, everyone feels differently about education. We've talked about this before. People have their own perspectives. So first of all, you're going to have Christian families that complain that your curriculum is too secular, that you should be allowing God into the classroom, that what you're doing isn't inclusive enough of Christian values. Then you're going to have non-Christians who say that your school is too Christian. So here's an example of a school in France where they banned the movie The Star because they felt it was too Christian. So whether these are families that they might be immigrants from another country and have a very different religious view, so they might be saying, no, your school is too Christian. Then you can also have agnostic or atheist families who complain about any type of religion being discussed at all in your classroom. Again, this starts to feel like one of those situations where it's impossible to make everybody happy, and sometimes that does occur. Regardless, you need to avoid stereotyping your students based upon whatever their religious belief is or their lack of religious belief. And when it comes to censorship, you're going to have some parents who believe that there are certain books, certain curriculums, certain things that just simply should not be discussed in school. So here's an interesting one for you. There are a large number of parents out there who believe that Harry Potter books should be banned in schools. They believe that Harry Potter books promote witchcraft, wizardry, and is something that is non-Christian and should not be brought into the classroom. They might complain that something you're covering is too sexually explicit, that it has bad language, that it's not appropriate for the age of their students, or that perhaps it explores LGBTQ content that they're not comfortable with. I have to admit, I can even relate to this, so the one where it says not age appropriate. So the school my daughter was in last year, one day for music, they showed a video of the Nutcracker. It was an old cartoon. And my daughter had a horrible reaction to it. She got incredibly upset over the scene with the rats, the mice, and she ended up in the principal's office upset. She had night terrors that night. From then on, we've never been able to read our Nutcracker books again or talk about it. When I looked it up online, that particular movie, I have to say, The rats were portrayed as frightening. They were horrifying creatures with red eyes, and this was for a first grade class. And so it was something that I did talk to the school about. So you are going to have parents with all kinds of different issues when it comes to their concerns regarding what you're teaching and showing their students. They might also be upset about the discussion of multicultural content. So here's an interesting one that I could also relate to based upon experiences with previous parents in schools. There are a good number of parents, Catholic parents, who are against yoga. Not necessarily the stretching involved with yoga, but the connection with yoga and Hinduism, and that there have been some Catholic exorcists connected with the Vatican who say that there's an increase in the number of demonic possessions with people who engage in yoga. So you never know what kinds of concerns your parents might have, but this is the idea of be prepared for anything and be open to listen and to think about things reasonably. So I thought this might lead you to the question of what is and isn't allowed in schools legally. What can and can't you do? So when I'm giving you this legal advice here, it comes from A, the textbook, and B, federal law. Keep in mind, states can sometimes do their own thing, okay? But in general, teachers, you can have your own religious beliefs, but if you are in a public school, you cannot promote your religion. You're not to try to indoctrinate your students or share that religion with them. Your religion should be personal. Also, schools are not to organize prayer. It cannot be required by school officials. Now, again, keep in mind, you can see from up here, there are some states that are attempting to change this, but federally, according to the Supreme Court, you are not to organize or force students to engage in prayer. Now, students can engage in voluntary prayer if they start it themselves and is completely run by the students and it is voluntary. Schools also cannot support a moment of silence because in a moment of silence, it is implied that you are praying. What else? Books. You're going to have some parents that might call for the removal of books. We already talked about the Harry Potter books. According to federal law, you cannot remove a book simply due to dislike, that the parent simply does not like it. The only cause by which you can remove a book is if it is considered inappropriate for the students, and then you have to somehow prove that it is inappropriate. And you will see this from time to time. One of our professors at OU regularly does a banned book series on Facebook and talks about various banned books that she is quite a fan of. And then you've also seen, recent things going on in the news of different books that states might be attempting to remove from curriculum. All right, let's see some other ways that you might see culture in the classroom, and that is language diversity. We've talked about how English language learners are the fastest growing segment of your population. That pretty much anywhere you plan to teach, you're going to need to be prepared for students who do not speak English as their first language. So, how can you help these students? This one seems obvious, but practice pronouncing their names. We have so much identity connected with our names, and that is often the first thing that occurs is you call your student's name. So you're going to want to perhaps even ask them ahead of time, would you mind telling me how you pronounce your name so that I say it correctly? Because students can take great offense if you don't. Now, here's a funny video from Key and Peele. Please do not take offense to this. It is meant to be a parody of the idea of teachers getting students' names wrong.
Okay, let's take a roll here. Jay Quellen. Where's Jay Quellen at? No Jay Quellen here? Yeah.
Do you mean Jacqueline?
Okay, so that's how it's gonna be. Y'all wanna play? Okay then. I've got my eye on you, Jay Quellen. Balake. Where is Balake at? There's no Balake here today. Yes, sir.
My name is Blake.
Are you out of your goddamn mind?
Blake?
What?
Okay, so Stop share. Pause. Okay, so I pardon if the video on that was a bit halting. I've discovered that through this format, I can't play videos within the slide, so lesson learned. So when it comes to practicing your students' names, you might want to ask them how to do it correctly. You're going to also want to monitor how they're doing. Keep a special eye on these ELL students to make sure they're not falling behind, and offer them help as needed. You might need to offer them tutoring. You might need to find them a tutor, work with them one-on-one, do what you can to scaffold their learning. You might want to also consider assigning a peer partner. Research shows that assigning a peer partner can be extremely helpful, not only in terms of their social development, but their academic as well. You'd want to find a student who perhaps knows a little bit about their language or culture, a student who is academically bright and cooperative and easy to work with. Also, something that can be a really big help is visual aids. So whether it is basic vocabulary that they need to understand to work within the classroom, whether you're working on something like prepositions, this is a fabulous poster here giving some visual depictions of different prepositions. What can you do to help them visually? And then finally, help them with what we call academic language. Academic language is different from conversational. Conversational is knowing how to ask where the bathroom is or telling you what their name is. But academic is, do they know the word for atom and molecule in your language? Do they know the word for fraction and multiplication? And that can sometimes be much more taxing on them. All right, one of our last topics is going to be looking at parental choice when it comes to schools. And this is an interesting topic. I did have a video that was going to start off showing us different options, but as we've seen, the videos are a bit challenging, so I'm afraid I'll have to move along. So I'm going to have a question for you. What % of your public school students in the United States actually attend private schools instead? So what % of our students go to private schools? The answer to that is 10%. So about 10% of our students go to private schools. They do not go to public schools. Why? There are a lot of reasons why parents might choose private schools over public ones. They might want a curriculum that's more challenging. I have a friend who's teaching 7th and 8th grade at a private school, and she recently posted a Facebook picture of her reading list for the year. And you might see her reading list might be considered a bit more challenging than what you might see in public schools. Another reason that parents might want to go to private schools instead, they might want a school that's smaller. You know, some public schools can be quite large. I remember my mother's graduating class was 1,000 students. It's easy to get lost in a big school. So they might want a smaller school where they feel like their students are going to get more individualized attention. However, you can see from this chart up above, that may or may not be the case. Some private schools do have a smaller teacher to student ratio, and some it's not significantly smaller. They might also be seeking the religious values or the direction that a private school might give their students when it comes to behavior management and virtue and character. Here's a school up above that's in my area that my husband and I both used to work with. In addition to a grade point average, your report card also includes virtues. So you get evaluated on your cardinal virtues: fortitude, temperance, prudence, and courage, as well as how you're doing academically. Here's also, if you'd like to see the breakdown of private schools in terms of their religious or other directions. But private schools are not the only option. We're going to look at 3 other ones and then we'll be finished. So the first one is a school voucher. You might even be wondering, what in the world is a school voucher? Well, it's a relatively new concept. It's the idea of the government giving you a promissory note that you can turn in at a private school. So basically the government's going to be paying for you to go to private school. It is not only relatively new, it is quite controversial. It is something that is going on in Ohio. In Ohio, we call it the Ed Choice Scholarship Program. If you attend a private school, but choose to send your child to a private school, if it is one of their select private schools, it doesn't apply to all of them, You can apply for the Ed Choice Scholarship, where they give you basically a voucher that you can turn in at that private school and it pays for your tuition. So one of the most controversial topics in education. If you do a search for this on Facebook or other social media sites, you'll see a lot of people talking about how you're definitely either on one side or the other when it comes to school voucher programs. So here is the Athens City School Board discussing it on their Facebook site. So if you are a supporter of school vouchers, you are a supporter of them because you believe that if parents are given the option, they will want to send their kid to the best school that they can. And you also believe that vouchers might force these low-performing schools to try to do better. So for instance, in Marietta, where I'm from, St. Mary's Catholic School is part of the Ed Choice program starting this year. So you could choose to send your child there. And I can see why some parents might choose that, even if they're not Catholic, because I know last year, pretty much every school in the area got a failing score on their report card. And if your students are attending a failing school, you might want other options for them. Who is it that supports vouchers? This is who supports vouchers. It is supported by low-income families, by African Americans, and Republicans. That actually tends to be the top supporters, but you can see that there are others who support it as well. Critics. Okay, if you do not like school vouchers, this is typically your argument. You think that vouchers are decreasing funding for public schools, that is taking money from the public school and giving it to a private school. And you believe that by doing that, that is unconstitutional, that you're taking public funds for a private and perhaps religious institution. I do want to point out that the Supreme Court in Cleveland, so in Ohio, did say that it is not unconstitutional, that we are able to do this. So if you are a critic, this is kind of what you believe, that you can either choose between well-funded public schools or well-funded private schools where the public schools are just going to wither away. I think that is a bit extreme. If you do look at the before and after a voucher, so I believe this is from Texas, if I recall my source, you can see in terms of net difference, it was only a 15 student difference. So it's not like they were sending a significant number of students to these private schools. So I don't think it's making as big of an impact, perhaps, as some people might believe. Okay, that's not all in terms of options. You also have charter schools. What's a charter school? A charter school is a public school, but it's a public school that, although it gets public funding, it doesn't report to the public school system. It is run independently. Here's some data up here from Ohio. So 6% of charter schools are actually online schools in Ohio. There are 125,000 students in Ohio that go to charter schools. There are lots and lots of them in larger areas such as Columbus. Charter schools have a lot more autonomy because they do not report to the Department of Education. They are evaluated by the state, but based upon whatever goals they provided in their charter. So they write their own goals, and they're evaluated based upon how well they meet their own goals. They might have a specialized focus. Here's one I wanted to point out from Columbus. It is the Preparatory and Fitness Academy, and they value physical fitness equally with academics. And so they actually have not only kinesthetic learning, but a great deal of physical fitness in their curriculum. And also to point out, it is run by an independent group. They do not report to the state board. So it's usually run as a business. In terms of success, it's really kind of mixed results. You can see that in terms of reading and math, they aren't really necessarily doing better or worse than public schools if you look at it overall. And our last category is a magnet school. Okay, what's a magnet school? A magnet school is also a public school. It is a free public school. You can, pretty much anyone can attend there. It is managed by the school district. They do report to the state school board. So it is also run by public school employees. And they are organized based upon some sort of an academic theme. There are a number of magnet schools in Columbus and other areas as well, whether we're looking at Fort Hays Metropolitan, if I scoot to the side, Columbus Alternative High School. And again, they usually have some sort of a theme, something that they focus upon. Magnet schools may not have admission criteria, so you may not have to have a certain GPA to get in, but what they often do is a lottery. So you will apply and they will randomly draw a certain number of students to fill their seats, and that's who gets to go. If you're curious about that, there is a documentary you can watch called The Lottery that I believe is on Netflix. In terms of the success of magnet schools, again, it is also mixed. If you're looking overall at all these different school options, basically parental surveys show that they are most satisfied with private schools. Next is charter schools, and last is public schools. Magnet schools are not included in this particular option, but I would say they're probably down there with the charter schools as well. So again, success and parental opinion is somewhat mixed. The last thing we're going to take a look at is working with parents and communities. And I can't say this enough. Trust and respect with your parents and with your communities is essential to be an effective teacher. There are lots of ways you can try to build trust with your parents. You can reach out to family members. You can make those phone calls, send emails, invite them to special events, and demonstrate respect. That you respect their opinion, you respect their thoughts, you want their feedback on things. Here's an example, the idea of respecting families when it comes to working with online learning. That perhaps you shouldn't force your students to show a video of where they are in these online meetings, because maybe they're having to meet you in a Taco Bell parking lot because that's the only place that has Wi-Fi, or in their family's car. To think about families and try to respect their issues. You're going to want to demonstrate that you have a desire to contribute to their child's education, that you really care about their students' learning and that you're trying to help them. You're going to want to be a listening teacher, that you listen to the concerns of the parents and get to know the families that you're going to be working with. When it comes to communication between schools and parents, it is often one way, meaning usually we are providing information to the parents, but not necessarily seeking any sort of feedback back from them. Hi, you can just pop in. Oh, so hi, this is Sarah. Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
She has come in to see what her mom is doing because I've been spending a long time on here and I'm just about finished. So be patient with me. Okay, so I thought that this would be a funny joke, the idea of when you open up your email and there's one from that parent. You are going to have that parent, but try to be respectful and patient with all of your parents. Two-way communication with real interaction is going to be your key, not just giving them information and not listening back. You need to ask questions. You need to listen. When you have those parent-teacher meetings, they should be collaborative. It's not just you telling them how their kid is doing and you walk away. I love this idea of a way of collecting feedback from the parents and not just having them say it, but actually perhaps having them write it down. So again, I hope that was a lot for you to think about, but this is our video for chapter 5. And again, this was an experimental format, but I hope that you enjoyed it and thank you for your attention.